A 4-year-old girl washing her grandmother's feet while begging for mercy. A billionaire father too blind to see. What happens when a man discovers his own mother turned his daughter into a servant? The answer will shatter everything you thought you knew about family, power, and redemption. Will justice come before it's too late? Stay until the end. You won't believe what this little girl becomes. Before this story begins, subscribe to the channel and type love in the comments. A beautiful piece of good news may come your way very soon. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. The December wind howled through Manhattan's financial district as Christopher Bennett signed his 43rd contract of the day. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showed a man who'd conquered everything except time itself. At 38, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of sharp blue eyes that intimidated boardrooms, he'd built Bennett Global Technologies from a garage startup into an empire worth $18 billion. The cost? He couldn't remember the last time he'd actually seen his daughter awake. Victoria Bennett, his 4-year-old daughter, lived in the same Fifth Avenue mansion but existed in a completely separate world. One Christopher had allowed his mother to create. After his wife Rachel died in childbirth, grief had consumed him. Work became his escape and international business became his refuge. He traveled constantly, 2 weeks in Tokyo, 10 days in London, a month in Singapore. When he was in New York, he stayed at his downtown office apartment more often than the mansion. His mother, Patricia Bennett, had orchestrated this arrangement with calculated precision. "You focus on building the empire," she'd said, her voice dripping with aristocratic certainty. "I'll handle the child. That's what grandmothers do. You're in no condition to parent, Christopher. Let me manage things here." He'd believed her. God, how he'd believed her. Patricia was a formidable woman in her late 60s with perfectly styled silver-gray hair, expensive pearl necklaces, and the bearing of old Manhattan royalty. She wore her red designer suits like armor, and her contempt for weakness like a crown. She'd convinced Christopher that his presence actually upset Victoria, that the child cried when he was mentioned, that it was better for everyone if he stayed away. "Children need consistency," Patricia had insisted. "Your constant traveling confuses her. Let her bond with me. When she's older, when you've established the company properly, then you can build a relationship." So Christopher had stayed away. He'd sent gifts that Patricia claimed upset Victoria. He'd attempted video calls that Patricia said gave the child nightmares. Every connection he'd tried to forge had been sabotaged with surgical precision, and in his grief-addled state, he'd accepted it all. Until the universe orchestrated a moment that changed everything. That Thursday, Christopher's crucial meeting with Japanese investors collapsed when their CEO suffered a heart attack mid-flight. His assistant called at 2 p.m. "They've rescheduled for next month. Your afternoon just cleared." Christopher had planned to work in his office apartment, but something, intuition, fate, divine intervention, made him drive to the mansion instead. He hadn't been there in 3 weeks. Patricia didn't know he was coming. The mansion stood silent at 3:47 p.m., an unusual stillness that made his skin prickle. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, wasn't in the kitchen. Rodriguez, the butler, wasn't at his post. Christopher later learned they'd been sent on errands specifically to ensure no witnesses. But Patricia hadn't expected Christopher. He heard a child's voice. His daughter's voice. "Please, my arms hurt." The words came from his mother's private sitting room on the second floor. Christopher had never entered that space uninvited. Patricia guarded her privacy like a dragon guarding gold. But that voice, so small, so broken, pulled him forward. He pushed open the ornate door. The scene before him would replay in his nightmares for years to come. Victoria, wearing a stained, oversized dress that hung on her tiny frame, knelt on the marble floor. Her long blonde hair was tangled and dirty. Her tiny hands, red and wrinkled from water, gripped a silver basin. Patricia sat in her throne-like chair, regal in her crimson suit, one bare foot extended while Victoria washed it with trembling fingers. "The water's cold, you stupid child," Patricia hissed, her perfectly made-up face twisted with disgust. "Do it again, and this time maybe you'll remember to check the temperature before wasting my time." Victoria's stomach growled audibly in the silent room. Her face was gaunt, eyes hollow with exhaustion. She couldn't have weighed more than 30 pounds. Dark circles shadowed her eyes the same blue as Christopher's, now filled with defeat. "I'm sorry, grandmother," Victoria whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'll do better. Please, may I have lunch after? I'm very hungry." Patricia's laugh was cruel, her red lips curling into a sneer. "Lunch? You haven't earned lunch. Perhaps if you'd done this right the first time, or the second, or the third, you might deserve food. But servants who fail don't eat. That's how the real world works, child. Servants." She'd called his daughter a servant. Christopher's briefcase hit the floor with a thunderous crash. Both Patricia and Victoria jumped. His mother's face drained of color, then flushed scarlet. Victoria's eyes went wide with terror, and she immediately prostrated herself on the floor, her small body shaking. "Forgive me, sir," Victoria said, her voice mechanical, rehearsed. "I didn't know you were home. I'll disappear. Please don't be angry at grandmother." "Sir?" His own daughter called him sir. She didn't even recognize him as her father. Christopher's world tilted sideways. 4 years. For 4 years, while he built his empire and hid from his grief in foreign boardrooms, his mother had been building something else entirely. A prison, a torture chamber, a hell disguised as a home. "Victoria," he said, his voice breaking on her name. "Baby, look at me." The little girl raised her head slowly, as if expecting a blow. When their eyes met, the same striking blue eyes, Christopher saw something that shattered the last piece of his heart. She didn't recognize him. Not really. He was a stranger who occasionally appeared in photographs. Nothing more. "Christopher, I can explain." Patricia started, rising from her chair with practiced grace, her pearl necklace catching the light. "Get out." His voice was quiet, deadly. "Get out of this house right now." "This is my house. I raised you here. You ungrateful—" Patricia's aristocratic mask cracked, revealing the fury beneath. "I said get out." The roar that erupted from Christopher made Victoria whimper and curl into a ball. He forced himself to breathe, to think. "You have 30 minutes to pack a bag and leave. If you're still here in 31 minutes, I'm calling the police and having you arrested for child abuse, and mother, I will prosecute. I will use every resource I have to make sure you never hurt another child again." Patricia's face twisted with rage and disbelief, her carefully applied makeup cracking around her eyes. "You wouldn't dare. I'm your mother. I'm a Bennett. You're a monster." Christopher knelt beside Victoria, who was shaking violently. "And you're no longer welcome in my daughter's life." After Patricia stormed out, her heels clicking furiously on the marble, Christopher tried to lift Victoria into his arms. She flinched so hard, she banged her head against the wall. "Please don't hit me," she begged, her small hands raised defensively. "I'll work harder. I'll be better. I'll be invisible. Please." Christopher's tears fell on his daughter's matted blonde hair as he gathered her carefully, moving slowly so she wouldn't be afraid. She weighed nothing. He could feel her ribs through the thin dress. "Baby girl," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. No one is ever going to hurt you again. I promise." Victoria looked up at him with eyes far too old for a 4-year-old, searching his face as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Are you my daddy? Grandmother said you were too important for me, that I wasn't good enough to be your daughter, that you didn't want to see me because I made you sad." The last fragment of Christopher's old life crumbled to dust. In its place, something new and fierce took root. A purpose beyond profit. A mission beyond markets. He would make this right. Whatever it took, however long it required, he would save his daughter. But as he carried Victoria toward her room, a barren space he'd never actually seen, he had no idea that saving her would mean confronting demons he didn't know he had. That the road ahead would test everything he thought he knew about himself. And he certainly didn't know that his broken, starving, terrified little girl carried inside her a gift so extraordinary, it would eventually change the world. But first, they both had to survive what came next. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had seen neglect in her 20 years as a pediatrician, but nothing prepared her for Victoria Bennett. Christopher had rushed his daughter to New York Presbyterian within an hour of discovering her condition, and Sarah had immediately ordered a full medical evaluation. The results made her sick. "Mr. Bennett," Sarah said carefully, closing the exam room door. Victoria was sleeping finally, after they'd given her fluids and a carefully measured amount of food. "Your daughter is severely malnourished. She's in the 3rd percentile for weight and has the bone density of a much younger child. I'm seeing evidence of chronic dehydration, vitamin deficiencies, and—" She paused, her professional composure cracking. "She has bruises in various stages of healing on her arms and legs. Old scars on her hands that look like burns." Christopher gripped the chair so hard his knuckles went white, his jaw clenched. "Burns? From hot water, most likely. Mr. Bennett, I'm legally required to report suspected child abuse. I've already contacted Child Protective Services. They'll want to interview you and investigate. Do it." Christopher's voice was hollow, his blue eyes burning with controlled fury. "Report everything. Document everything. I want a complete record of what was done to my daughter." Sarah studied him. In her experience, wealthy parents usually lawyer up immediately, concerned about their reputations. Christopher Bennett looked like he wanted to tear the world apart with his bare hands. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "During the neurological exam, Victoria displayed some unusual responses." "What kind of responses?" "She correctly identified complex musical pitches. When Nurse Chen hummed a tune, Victoria instantly named every note, not just recognizing the song, but identifying each individual pitch by its scientific designation. C sharp, E flat, things that typically require years of training. She also solved a logic puzzle meant for 8-year-olds in under 30 seconds. Christopher blinked. "I don't understand. Is that normal?" "No, Mr. Bennett. It's exceptional, possibly genius-level exceptional. I'd like to recommend a full cognitive assessment when she's physically stronger. But right now, the priority is her recovery. I'm going to keep her hospitalized for at least 3 days to stabilize her condition and monitor her nutritional rehabilitation. Then she'll need careful supervision at home." "She'll have it," Christopher said, running a hand through his dark hair. "Whatever she needs. Money is no object." Sarah smiled sadly. "Mr. Bennett, Victoria doesn't need money. She needs you. When we tried to examine her earlier, she fought us desperately until we mentioned you were here. Then she submitted completely. She's terrified of authority figures, but she's searching for you, looking for a parent to trust." The words hit Christopher like physical blows. "I don't know how to be a father. I've been absent for her entire life." "Then learn," Sarah said simply. "Because that little girl in there has suffered unimaginable trauma. The road ahead won't be easy. She'll have nightmares, trust issues, behavioral challenges. But children are remarkably resilient if they have one person who truly sees them and loves them unconditionally." Christopher looked through the window at Victoria's sleeping form, her blonde hair spread across the white pillow. She looked so small in the hospital bed, so fragile. "What if I fail her again?" "Then you'll get up and try again," Sarah said. "That's what good parents do." Over the next 3 days, Christopher cleared his calendar completely, an unprecedented act that sent shockwaves through Bennett Global Technologies. His board members called frantically. His investors demanded meetings. His competitors circled like sharks sensing blood. He ignored them all. Instead, he sat beside Victoria's hospital bed, reading her stories and learning how to be present. She was skittish at first, flinching when he moved too quickly, apologizing for existing. But slowly, microscopically, she began to relax around this tall man with kind blue eyes and gentle hands. On the second day, she asked him a question that broke his heart. "Daddy, when I leave the hospital, will I go back to grandmother's room?" Christopher knelt beside her bed, taking her small hand gently in his larger one. "Victoria, I need you to listen very carefully. Grandmother did very bad things to you, things that were wrong and cruel. She's never going to live with us again. Never. You're going to have your own beautiful room with toys and books and everything a little girl should have, and I'm going to be there. Every single day." Victoria's blue eyes filled with tears. "But you're too important," Grandmother said. "Grandmother was wrong about everything," Christopher interrupted gently. brushing a strand of blonde hair from her face. "The most important thing in my entire life is you. Not my company, not my money, you. Do you understand?" She didn't, not really. How could she? But she nodded, and Christopher saw a tiny spark of hope kindle in her eyes. The CPS investigation was brutal but necessary. Christopher cooperated fully, providing access to the mansion, to staff members, to financial records. The caseworker, a sharp-eyed woman named Karen Rodriguez, didn't pull punches. "Mr. Bennett, your mother created a systematic pattern of abuse and neglect spanning multiple years. We have testimony from Mrs. Chen, your former housekeeper, who claims she was threatened with deportation if she interfered. Your mother exploited that fear ruthlessly." Christopher's jaw clenched, his hands forming fists. "Mrs. Chen is getting a lawyer, a settlement, and my deepest apologies. My mother will face consequences. That's appreciated, but my concern is Victoria's well-being moving forward. You've been an absent father. Can you honestly provide the stable, nurturing environment she needs?" It was a fair question. Christopher met Karen's gaze directly. "I've been absent, yes. I've failed my daughter in ways I can never fully repair. But I'm here now and I'm not going anywhere. I've hired a trauma-specialized child therapist. I'm converting my schedule to work from home 3 days a week. I've enrolled in parenting classes, and I've promised Victoria that she comes first. I intend to keep that promise." Karen studied him for a long moment, her expression softening slightly. "All right, Mr. Bennett. We'll allow Victoria to return to your custody with mandatory check-ins. But understand this. We'll be watching. One sign that she's being neglected or harmed and she'll be removed immediately." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Christopher said. On discharge day, Christopher had arranged something special. He'd hired a team to completely transform Victoria's former room, the sparse, prison-like space where she'd slept on a thin mattress, into something magical. When he carried her through the mansion doors, she tensed, expecting to return to her nightmare. "Close your eyes, sweetheart," Christopher whispered, his voice warm. "I have a surprise." He climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, where her new room waited. He'd moved her space entirely, putting her in the largest bedroom with the best natural light. The room now held a princess bed with soft pink bedding, shelves filled with books, an art table stocked with supplies, and toys she'd only dreamed about. "Open your eyes, Victoria," she gasped, her small mouth forming an O. Her tiny hands flew to her face. Is this mine?" "All yours," Christopher confirmed, setting her down gently. "You can play with anything you want. No one will punish you. No one will take it away." Victoria took a tentative step forward, then another. She touched the soft bedding like it might disappear, picked up a stuffed rabbit and held it close to her chest. Then suddenly she burst into tears. Christopher panicked, kneeling beside her. "What's wrong? Don't you like it?" "It's too much," Victoria sobbed, her small body shaking. "I don't deserve this. I'm not good enough. I'll ruin everything and you'll send me back to grandmother." Christopher scooped her up, holding her close while she cried against his shoulder. "Listen to me, Victoria. You deserve this and so much more. You deserve to be happy. You deserve to be loved. And nothing you do will ever make me send you away. You're my daughter. You're home." She cried for 20 minutes, releasing years of pain and fear. Christopher held her through all of it, whispering promises and reassurances. When she finally calmed, she looked up at him with red, swollen eyes. "Daddy, will you read me a story?" It was the first time she'd called him Daddy without prompting. Christopher's vision blurred with tears. "I would love nothing more." They curled up together on her new bed, and Christopher read Charlotte's Web until Victoria fell asleep on his chest. As he watched her breathe, peaceful for the first time in years, he made a silent vow. He would be the father she deserved. He would help her heal. He would protect her from everyone who'd ever hurt her. But he had no idea that the real battle was just beginning, that Patricia Bennett wasn't defeated, just regrouping, that dark forces were moving behind the scenes, planning to tear them apart. And he certainly didn't know that Victoria's extraordinary mind was about to reveal itself in ways that would attract both miracle and danger. The peaceful moment couldn't last. Outside the mansion, wheels were already in motion. Phone calls were being made. Lawyers were being hired. A grandmother's fury was being weaponized. The war for Victoria's soul was about to begin. Patricia Bennett sat in her attorney's office, her silver hair perfectly styled, wearing an elegant navy suit and her favorite pearl necklace. Her face was a mask of righteous indignation as she dabbed her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief. Theodore Ashworth, Manhattan's most ruthless family lawyer, listened to her version of events with practiced neutrality. "My son has had some kind of breakdown," Patricia explained, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "He burst into my home, screamed at me, and threw me out without cause. All because I was teaching my granddaughter proper discipline. The child was spoiled, Theodore. Lazy. I was preparing her for the real world." Theodore had represented the Bennett family for 30 years. He knew Patricia well enough to read between the lines, to see the cold calculation behind her theatrical grief. "Mrs. Bennett, I need you to be completely honest with me. Were there any marks on the child? Any evidence of physical punishment?" Patricia's hesitation lasted only a fraction of a second, a brief crack in her aristocratic composure. "The child bruises easily. She's clumsy." "I see." Theodore made a note. "And the malnutrition diagnosis from the hospital?" "She's a picky eater. I was trying different approaches to get her to eat properly." Theodore set down his pen, studying the elegant woman across from him. "Patricia, I'm going to be blunt. If Christopher files charges and if the evidence is as damaging as I suspect, you could face criminal prosecution. Child abuse charges. The optics alone would destroy the Bennett family reputation you've spent decades building." Patricia's facade cracked, her eyes flashing with fury. "That ungrateful boy wouldn't dare. I raised him. I made him into what he is today. And that's exactly what I'll argue in court if it comes to it," Theodore said smoothly. "But we need a strategy. Christopher has resources. He has public sympathy. We need leverage." "What kind of leverage?" Theodore smiled coldly, leaning back in his leather chair. "Custody battles are won by questioning fitness. Christopher abandoned his daughter for 4 years, leaving her entirely in your care. We argue that he's an absentee father having a guilt-induced crisis. We paint you as the stable, long-term caregiver being scapegoated for normal grandparental discipline. We file for grandparents' rights and partial custody." Patricia leaned forward, her pearl necklace swaying. "Can we win?" "Possibly. Especially if we can demonstrate that removing Victoria from your influence traumatizes her. Children often side with their abusers out of fear. If she testifies that she wants to see you—" "She won't," Patricia interrupted bitterly. "Christopher has turned her against me. Then we need a different approach. Medical experts who'll testify that Christopher's sudden lifestyle change is unstable. Character witnesses who'll describe his workaholism. Financial experts who'll show that his company is suffering from his absence, suggesting his focus on Victoria is temporary performative guilt." Patricia smiled for the first time since entering the office, a cold expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Do it. File everything. I want my granddaughter back, Theodore. She needs proper guidance." What Patricia didn't say, what she barely admitted to herself, was that Victoria represented something darker than discipline. The child was a living reminder of Rachel, the daughter-in-law Patricia had despised. Rachel had been warm, creative, common, everything Patricia's aristocratic world rejected. When Rachel died and left behind a daughter, Patricia had seen an opportunity for revenge disguised as child-rearing. She'd molded Victoria into everything Rachel wasn't: silent, obedient, invisible, a servant instead of a person, and she'd enjoyed it. Meanwhile, across town, Christopher was learning exactly how damaged his daughter truly was. The first night in her new room, Victoria woke screaming at 2 a.m. Christopher rushed in to find her huddled in the corner, eyes wild with terror, her small body trembling violently. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry," she kept repeating, her voice hoarse. "I'll clean it better. Please don't lock me in the dark." It took Christopher 45 minutes to calm her down enough to explain that she'd had a nightmare, that she was safe, that no one would lock her anywhere. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the child trauma therapist Christopher had hired, arrived the next morning. She was a kind woman in her 50s with gentle eyes and infinite patience, wearing soft colors that wouldn't frighten a traumatized child. "Victoria," Jennifer said softly during their first session, sitting at the little girl's level. "I want you to know that this is a safe space. Nothing you say here will get you in trouble. Can you tell me about living with your grandmother?" Victoria looked at Christopher, her blue eyes seeking permission. He nodded encouragingly, though his heart was breaking. "Grandmother said I had to earn everything," Victoria began, her voice barely audible. "Food, water, sleep. If I didn't work hard enough or was bad, I didn't get those things. She said I was lucky she let me stay in the house at all, that I was a burden." Jennifer's expression remained professionally neutral, but Christopher saw her hand tighten around her pen. "What kind of work did you do?" "I cleaned her bathroom every morning before breakfast. I washed her clothes by hand because she said the machines damaged the fabric. I massaged her feet when they hurt. I organized her closet. Victoria's voice broke. "Sometimes I spilled things or made mistakes. Then she locked me in the storage room until I learned to be better." "How long would she lock you in there?" Jennifer asked gently. "Hours. Sometimes overnight. It was dark and cold. There were spiders. I was so scared." Tears rolled down Victoria's cheeks. Christopher had to leave the room. He stumbled into the hallway, his tall frame leaning against the wall as his vision blurred with rage and grief. His own mother, his own flesh and blood had tortured his child. When Jennifer emerged an hour later, her face was grim. "Mr. Bennett, Victoria has complex PTSD. She's been systematically abused and conditioned to believe she's worthless. Recovery will be a long process involving regular therapy, possibly medication for anxiety, and massive amounts of patience and consistency from you. What do I do?" Christopher asked desperately, running his hand through his hair. "How do I help her?" "You're already doing it, being present, being patient. But understand that she'll test you. She'll expect you to abandon her or hurt her because that's all she knows. When she acts out, and she will, she's checking if your love is conditional. You need to prove it's not." The testing came sooner than expected. 3 days later, Victoria deliberately knocked over a glass of milk at breakfast. She then froze, waiting for the punishment, her small body rigid with fear. When Christopher simply said, "Accidents happen, sweetheart. Let's clean it up together," she burst into tears. "You're supposed to be angry," she wailed, her voice breaking. "You're supposed to send me away." Christopher knelt beside her, carefully avoiding sudden movements. "Victoria, I will never send you away. Not for spilled milk, not for mistakes, not for anything. You are my daughter, and you will always have a home here with me." She didn't believe him yet, but she wanted to. Christopher could see that desire warring with her learned fear in those blue eyes so like his own. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. One evening, Christopher was working on his laptop in the living room while Victoria played quietly with her new art supplies. Suddenly, she appeared at his elbow with a drawing, her blonde hair falling over her face. "I made this for you, Daddy." The picture showed 2 stick figures holding hands, one big, one small, both smiling. Above them, Victoria had carefully written in wobbly letters, "My daddy loves me." Christopher's throat closed. He pulled Victoria into his lap, holding her close. "I do love you, sweetheart. So much. More than anything in the whole world." For the first time, Victoria hugged him back, really hugged him, her little arms wrapping around his neck tightly. "I love you too, Daddy," she whispered. It was a perfect moment, a moment of healing and hope. But perfection never lasts. The next morning, Theodore Ashworth filed a lawsuit on behalf of Patricia Bennett seeking partial custody and visitation rights. The papers arrived via courier, officially dragging their private nightmare into the public arena. Christopher read the filing with mounting horror. Patricia claimed she'd been Victoria's primary caregiver for 4 years, and that Christopher's sudden involvement was disruptive and potentially harmful. She presented affidavits from society friends describing her as a loving grandmother. She even produced photos of Victoria at family events, carefully cropped to show only smiling moments. What the photos didn't show were the threats Patricia had made before each event, the punishments promised if Victoria didn't perform perfectly, the terror behind every forced smile. "We're going to fight this," Christopher told his own attorney Marcus Chen that afternoon. "I don't care what it costs, Patricia doesn't get near Victoria, ever." Marcus, a Harvard-trained litigator known for winning impossible cases, nodded grimly. "The challenge is that New York law favors family preservation. Patricia will argue that supervised visitation serves Victoria's best interests by maintaining family connections. We need to prove she's dangerous, not just strict. I have medical records, testimony from Dr. Walsh, evidence of abuse, all of which Patricia will claim is exaggerated or misinterpreted," Marcus interrupted. "Family court isn't criminal court. The burden of proof is different. We need Victoria's testimony." Christopher's blood ran cold. "She's 4 years old. You want to put her on the stand?" "Not necessarily in court, but a forensic interview with a child psychologist that can be submitted as evidence. Victoria needs to tell her story in a legally documented way." The thought of putting Victoria through that kind of questioning made Christopher physically ill. But the alternative, allowing Patricia back into their lives, was unthinkable. That night, Christopher tried to explain the situation to Victoria in age-appropriate terms, sitting beside her on her princess bed. "Sweetheart, some people want to ask you questions about living with grandmother. They need to understand what happened so they can make sure you stay safe with me. Is that okay?" Victoria's face went pale, her blue eyes wide. "Will grandmother be there?" "No, baby. Just nice people who want to help you. What if I say the wrong thing? What if they send me back to her?" Christopher pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "There are no wrong answers, Victoria. You just tell the truth, and no matter what anyone says, you're staying with me. I promise." But promises, Christopher was learning, were fragile things, especially when the universe had other plans. The next week brought a development no one saw coming. During a routine cognitive assessment ordered by Dr. Walsh to establish Victoria's developmental baseline, the child psychologist discovered something extraordinary. Victoria Bennett wasn't just smart, she was exceptional in ways that occurred once in a generation. And that discovery would change everything. Dr. Helen Morrison had assessed hundreds of children in her 30-year career as a developmental psychologist. She'd seen prodigies, savants, and children with remarkable gifts. But Victoria Bennett was different, unsettlingly different. The assessment began simply enough. Helen sat across from the blonde 4-year-old in a cheerful playroom filled with toys and puzzles. Christopher watched through a one-way mirror, his jaw tight with concern as his daughter's small hands fidgeted nervously. "Victoria, I'm going to show you some pictures and ask you some questions," Helen said gently. "There are no wrong answers. This isn't a test, I just want to understand how you think, okay?" Victoria nodded, her blue eyes wary but curious. Helen started with standard assessments for a 4-year-old, identifying shapes, counting objects, recognizing colors. Victoria answered correctly but mechanically, as if the questions bored her. Then Helen moved to more complex tasks meant for children aged 7 to 9. "Can you arrange these blocks to match this pattern?" Helen asked, showing a geometric design. Victoria glanced at the pattern for exactly 3 seconds, then assembled the blocks perfectly, without hesitation, without trial and error. Helen's pulse quickened. She pulled out a musical puzzle, one where children had to identify which instrument made which sound. Before Helen could explain the task, Victoria said quietly, "The violin is out of tune, by approximately 1/4 step. It's making my ears uncomfortable." Helen blinked. "How do you know that?" "Oh, I can hear it," Victoria said simply, tilting her head. "All sounds have colors in my mind. The violin's color is wrong. It should be blue, but it's showing green." Synesthesia. The child had synesthesia combined with perfect pitch. Helen spent the next 2 hours pushing Victoria through increasingly difficult tasks. Mathematical problems meant for 10-year-olds, logic puzzles designed for teenagers, memory games that would challenge adults. Victoria solved them all with an eerie calm, as if she were simply reading answers from an invisible book. When Helen presented a complex piano melody, and asked Victoria to identify the notes. The little girl didn't just name them. She explained the harmonic structure, the key signature, and pointed out that the pianist had made a mistake in measure 17. "How do you know all this?" Helen asked, her professional composure cracking. "Has someone taught you music theory?" Victoria's expression clouded with fear. "Is it wrong? Am I in trouble?" "Grandmother said I shouldn't show off, that it made me ugly and proud." "No, sweetheart," Helen assured quickly. "You're not in trouble. You're extraordinary. Do you understand what that means?" "It means different," Victoria whispered. Grandmother said different was bad. After the session ended, Helen called Christopher into her office. Her hands were shaking slightly as she reviewed her notes. "Mr. Bennett, your daughter has an IQ that tests off the standard scale. I estimate it's somewhere above 160, possibly approaching 180. She has perfect pitch, synesthesia, eidetic memory, and cognitive processing abilities I've only read about in academic journals. She's not just gifted, she's profoundly exceptional." Christopher sank into a chair, overwhelmed. What does that mean for her? It means she needs specialized education, enrichment programs, careful nurturing of her abilities, but more importantly, Helen leaned forward, her expression serious. It means she's been suffering in ways we didn't fully understand. Highly gifted children experience the world with heightened intensity. Every emotion is amplified. Every trauma cuts deeper. The abuse she endured wasn't just physical and emotional neglect. It was the systematic suppression of a mind that processes reality differently than most people. Your mother was essentially torturing a child with special needs. Christopher felt sick. "I had no idea." "How could you? Victoria's been conditioned to hide her abilities, to make herself small and invisible. But Mr. Bennett, that kind of suppression causes profound psychological damage. We need to help her understand that her mind is a gift, not a curse. That being different isn't dangerous." "How do I do that?" "By celebrating her abilities instead of fearing them, by providing outlets for her intellect, by showing her that being extraordinary is safe with you." Helen paused. "There's something else. Victoria's gifts will attract attention. Once word gets out, and it will, people will want to study her, exploit her, use her for their own purposes. You need to protect her from that while still giving her opportunities to grow." Christopher's protective instincts flared immediately. "No one is using my daughter for anything." "I'm glad to hear that, but you should know. The custody battle with your mother just became exponentially more complicated." Helen was right. Within days, Theodore Ashworth had somehow obtained information about Victoria's assessment. The amended custody filing now included arguments that Victoria required specialized care and consistency that only Patricia, her long-term caregiver, could provide. They claimed Christopher's sudden involvement was disrupting a gifted child who needed stability. Marcus Chen read the new filing with disgust. They're going to argue that uprooting Victoria from Patricia's care is harmful to her development, that despite the discipline issues, Patricia provided the structured environment that allowed Victoria's gifts to emerge. "That's insane," Christopher said, his voice cold with fury. "My mother suppressed everything that made Victoria special. She punished her for being intelligent, which is exactly what we'll prove in court. But Christopher, we need to be prepared. This isn't going to be resolved quickly. Patricia's lawyers will drag this out for months, possibly years. Family court cases like this, especially with wealthy defendants who can afford endless appeals, we're looking at 18 months minimum before final resolution." Christopher wanted to put his fist through a wall. Instead, he focused on what mattered. Victoria. She was thriving in small, beautiful ways. She'd started smiling more, playing without fear, asking questions instead of apologizing for existing. One afternoon, Christopher found her at the piano in the music room, a space that had sat unused for years. She was picking out a melody with one finger, her small face scrunched in concentration. "Do you want to learn to play?" Christopher asked gently. Victoria jumped, then relaxed when she saw it was him. "Am I allowed?" Grandmother said the piano was only for important people, not for children who make noise. Christopher's heart clenched. He sat beside her on the bench. "Victoria, this is your home now. Every room, every instrument, every book, it's all yours to explore." You're not making noise, you're making music. There's a big difference. Really? Really, would you like piano lessons? Victoria's face lit up with an excitement Christopher had never seen before. Yes, please. The sounds in my head want to come out through my fingers. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, sweetheart. Within a week, Christopher had hired Professor James Liu, a Juilliard instructor who specialized in gifted young musicians. James was a patient man in his 50s who'd taught prodigies before, but even he was stunned by Victoria's abilities. She hears harmonies most trained musicians miss, James told Christopher after the third lesson. And she's absorbing technique at an impossible rate. Mr. Bennett, with proper training, your daughter could become one of the greatest pianists of her generation. But James also noticed something troubling. Whenever Victoria made a mistake, she'd freeze, her small body tensing as if expecting punishment. She'd apologize profusely, her blue eyes filling with tears. It took weeks of gentle reassurance before she understood that mistakes were part of learning, not crimes worthy of punishment. Over the following months, the legal battle ground forward with agonizing slowness. The forensic interview with Dr. Rebecca Stone, the court-appointed child psychologist, took place in February. Christopher wasn't allowed in the room, but he watched through the video feed, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles were white. Rebecca was skilled at working with traumatized children. She used dolls and drawings to help Victoria express what had happened. And slowly, painfully, Victoria told her story. She described being locked in dark rooms for hours, being denied food as punishment for spilling water, having her hands held under scalding water when she touched Patricia's belongings without permission, being forced to kneel on rice while memorizing etiquette rules she was too young to understand. Did your grandmother ever say nice things to you? Rebecca asked gently. Victoria thought for a long moment. Once, when I was 3, she said I had good posture, but then she said I still had a long way to go before I'd be acceptable. What did you think acceptable meant? Good enough to be seen, good enough to not be a burden. Victoria's voice was small. I tried so hard to be acceptable, but I always failed. Christopher had to leave the monitoring room. He stumbled into the hallway, tears streaming down his face. His beautiful, brilliant daughter had spent 4 years believing she was fundamentally defective. That love had to be earned through perfection. Rebecca's report was damning for Patricia. She concluded that Victoria had suffered severe and systematic emotional, physical, and psychological abuse, and that any contact with Patricia would be profoundly harmful to the child's recovery and well-being. But Theodore Ashworth wasn't finished. He produced Dr. Gerard Whitmore, a controversial psychologist known for defending strict parenting methods. Whitmore reviewed the case files and testified that Patricia's discipline, while harsh by modern standards, was consistent with traditional upper-class child rearing designed to produce exceptional individuals. The child is clearly gifted, Whitmore's report stated. Such gifts often emerge from environments that demand excellence. While some of Mrs. Bennett's methods may seem severe, they produced a child with extraordinary capabilities. Removing the child from this structured environment may actually harm her cognitive development. Marcus was furious. He's arguing that abuse is okay if it produces smart children. It's disgusting. Can we counter it? Absolutely. Dr. Walsh and Dr. Morrison will testify that Victoria's gifts emerged despite the abuse, not because of it, that her potential is actually being unlocked now that she's safe. But Christopher, you need to prepare yourself. We're looking at preliminary hearings, depositions, expert testimony, counter-testimony. This process will take at least a year, probably longer. The months crawled by. Spring turned to summer, then fall. Victoria celebrated her 5th birthday with a small party, her first real birthday celebration ever. Christopher invited her new friends from therapy groups and Dr. Walsh's office. Victoria laughed and played and ate cake without asking permission. It was beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. By winter, 14 months after Christopher had discovered the abuse, they finally had a trial date. But the legal machinery moved slowly, grinding through procedural delays and continuances. The preliminary hearing finally took place in March, 15 months after that December day when everything changed. Christopher sat in family court, his blue eyes fixed on the judge as both sides presented their cases. Patricia sat across the aisle, perfectly coiffed and composed in a burgundy suit, playing the role of grieving grandmother to perfection. Judge Maria Hernandez was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd presided over family court for 20 years. She listened to both sides with careful attention, her expression unreadable. "This court recognizes the complexity of this case," Judge Hernandez said finally. "We have a child who suffered documented abuse, but we also have a grandmother claiming her strict methods were misunderstood. We have a father who was absent for years, suddenly seeking full custody, and we have a gifted child whose needs are extraordinary." Christopher's stomach churned. "I'm ordering a temporary custody arrangement," the judge continued. "The child remains with her father. However, I'm also ordering supervised visitation with Mrs. Bennett, 1 hour per week, supervised by a court-approved social worker. We need to assess the nature of their relationship and whether reconciliation is possible before the full trial." "Your Honor, no." Christopher stood, his voice sharp with panic. "You can't send my daughter back to that woman, not even for an hour. She'll—" "Mr. Bennett, sit down," Judge Hernandez said firmly. "I understand your concerns, but this court must consider all factors, including the child's relationship with extended family. The visitation will be carefully monitored. If there are any signs of harm or distress, it will be terminated immediately. The full trial is scheduled for 8 months from now. These visits will help inform my final decision." Marcus put a hand on Christopher's arm, pulling him back down. Patricia smiled across the courtroom, a cold, triumphant expression. That night, Christopher had to explain to Victoria that she'd have to see her grandmother again. The little girl's reaction was immediate and visceral. She vomited from fear, then curled into a ball, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please don't make me go," she begged, her small body shaking. "Please, Daddy, I'll be better, I'll be perfect, just don't send me back." Christopher held her, his own tears falling into her blonde hair. "I won't let her hurt you again, I promise. I'll be right there. And if she says even one mean thing, one single thing, I'll stop it." But even as he made the promise, Christopher felt helpless. The system he'd always believed in was failing his daughter. The first supervised visitation took place in a sterile conference room at the courthouse. Christopher stood against the wall, his tall frame rigid with tension, while a social worker named Mrs. Thompson sat at the table with a notepad. Victoria clung to her father's leg, her face pale with terror. Patricia entered wearing an elegant cream suit and pearls, her silver hair perfect, her expression carefully crafted into grandmotherly concern. "Victoria, darling," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "How I've missed you." Victoria pressed harder against Christopher's leg, silent. "Come here, child," Patricia continued, opening her arms. "Give your grandmother a hug." "She doesn't have to hug you," Christopher said coldly. Patricia's smile tightened. "The court ordered visitation, Christopher. Don't interfere," Mrs. Thompson intervened. "Let's all sit down calmly. Victoria, you can sit wherever you're comfortable." Victoria chose the chair farthest from Patricia, her small hands gripped in her lap, knuckles white. Christopher sat beside her, close enough to intervene if needed. For the first 20 minutes, Patricia played the perfect grandmother. She asked about Victoria's new room, her toys, her health, but Victoria answered in monosyllables, her blue eyes downcast, her body language screaming discomfort. Then Patricia's mask began to slip. "You've gained weight," she observed, her tone shifting subtly. "Christopher must be overfeeding you. We'll need to watch that. Bennett women maintain their figures." Victoria flinched. "And your posture is atrocious," Patricia continued, leaning forward. "Sit up straight, child. I didn't raise you to slouch like common people." "She's 5 years old," Christopher interjected, his voice tight with controlled fury. "She can sit however she wants." "She's a Bennett," Patricia snapped, her aristocratic composure cracking. "She represents this family. Standards matter." Mrs. Thompson made a note. Victoria's breathing had become shallow and rapid. "I hear you've been playing piano," Patricia said, returning to her false sweetness. "How lovely. Of course, it takes years of proper instruction to play correctly. I hope you're not developing bad habits." Talented children can be ruined by permissive teaching. It was a subtle dig, but Victoria understood it perfectly. Her shoulders hunched, and tears began sliding down her cheeks silently. "We're done," Christopher announced, standing. "This visit is over." "We have 40 minutes remaining," Patricia protested. "I don't care. Look at her." Christopher gestured to Victoria, who was now shaking. "You're terrorizing a 5-year-old child. Mrs. Thompson, document that. Every word." Mrs. Thompson was indeed writing furiously. "Mr. Bennett, I understand your concern, but no. We're leaving. If the judge has a problem with that, she can hold me in contempt. I won't sit here and watch my daughter be psychologically tortured for 40 more minutes." Christopher scooped Victoria up, and she buried her face in his neck, her small body racked with silent sobs. As they left, he heard Patricia call out, "You can't protect her from the truth forever, Christopher. She needs to learn her place in this world." Mrs. Thompson's report was scathing. She documented Patricia's subtle but persistent emotional manipulation and inappropriate comments designed to undermine the child's sense of safety and self-worth. She recommended terminating visitation immediately, but Theodore Ashworth spun it differently. He argued that Victoria's reaction proved she'd been alienated from her grandmother by Christopher's influence, that the child's fear was manufactured, not genuine. He demanded continued visitation to repair the damaged relationship. The visits continued for 3 more agonizing months, each one leaving Victoria traumatized and Christopher furious. The nightmares intensified. Victoria woke screaming 3 or 4 times a week, convinced she was back in the storage room, locked in darkness. Dr. Walsh was deeply worried. The ongoing legal stress is undermining Victoria's recovery. Every court date, every visitation, it's re-traumatizing her. "Christopher, I hate to say this, but you need to consider a settlement. Give Patricia something to make her go away." "Like what?" Christopher demanded. "Money. She has her own fortune. Control. Over my dead body." "I'm not saying it's fair," Jennifer replied gently. "I'm saying that prolonged custody battles damage children. Sometimes the fastest resolution, even if imperfect, is better than years of litigation." Christopher knew she was right, but the thought of compromising with Patricia, of giving her anything, made him physically ill. Then Victoria made the choice for him. It happened during a piano lesson with Professor Liu. Victoria was working on a Bach prelude, her small fingers moving across the keys with increasing confidence. Suddenly she stopped mid-measure. "Professor Liu," she said quietly, "if I get really, really good at piano, will grandmother leave me alone?" James looked startled. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Grandmother said talented children who succeed bring honor to their families. If I become the best pianist ever, maybe she'll be proud of me. Maybe she'll stop trying to take me away from Daddy." James's expression crumbled. He looked at Christopher, who stood in the doorway, his heart breaking. "Victoria," Christopher said, kneeling beside the piano bench, "you don't have to be the best at anything for me to love you. You don't have to earn my protection or make your grandmother proud. You just have to be you. Do you understand?" Victoria's blue eyes filled with tears. "But what if the judge makes me go back to her? What if I'm not good enough to stay with you?" "That will never happen," Christopher promised, though fear clawed at his chest. "I will move heaven and earth to keep you safe." That night, Christopher made a decision. He called Marcus Chen at midnight. "I want to offer Patricia a deal," he said. "A settlement that ends this immediately." "What kind of deal?" "Money. A lot of money. $10 million in exchange for terminating all parental rights and visitation claims. She signs a legal document agreeing to never contact Victoria again, never attempt to see her, never interfere in her life." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That's a significant sum. Are you sure?" "I'd pay $100 million if that's what it took. Draft the agreement. Make it ironclad. I want this over." Theodore Ashworth received the offer the next morning. For 3 days, there was silence. Then Patricia's response came. She rejected it. "My client's relationship with her granddaughter cannot be quantified in monetary terms," Theodore wrote. "Mrs. Bennett seeks only what's best for the child." Christopher wanted to scream. This wasn't about Victoria. It was about power. about Patricia's inability to accept that she'd lost control. "Then we go to war," Christopher told Marcus. "No more settlements, no more compromises. We take this to trial and we bury her." The trial finally began in November, nearly 2 full years after Christopher had discovered the truth. The courtroom was packed with reporters. The case had captured public attention, becoming a symbol of the battle between old money tradition and modern child welfare. Christopher assembled his arsenal: medical records, therapy notes, testimony from experts, statements from household staff who'd witnessed the abuse. He hired private investigators who uncovered Patricia's history of cruelty, servants she'd fired for minor infractions, charities she'd bullied, society acquaintances she'd destroyed with rumors. But Patricia had her own weapons. She produced childhood friends of Christopher's who testified that he'd always been obsessed with work, even as a teenager, business associates who described his relentless ambition, board members who expressed concern about his recent absences from Bennett Global Technologies. The company's stock dropped initially when Mr. Bennett reduced his involvement, one analyst testified. Though it has since recovered, investors remain concerned about leadership stability. This suggests his focus on his daughter may be temporary, a guilt-driven impulse rather than a sustainable lifestyle change. Then came Dr. Gerard Whitmore testifying about traditional discipline methods and the supposed benefits of strict upbringing. Marcus cross-examined him aggressively, exposing the flaws in his philosophy. Then the defense called their witnesses. Dr. Walsh testified about Victoria's PTSD. Dr. Morrison explained how Victoria's gifts were flourishing now, in safety, in ways they never could under suppression. Mrs. Chen testified through tears about what she'd witnessed, her shame at not intervening, and the threats Patricia had used to ensure her silence. Finally, Judge Hernandez made a decision that shocked everyone. She wanted to speak with Victoria privately. "The child is now 5 years old and articulate," the judge said. "I want to hear from her directly, in chambers, with no attorneys present. Just her, me, and a child advocate." Christopher's blood ran cold, but he had no choice. He had to trust that Victoria would speak her truth. The meeting lasted 30 minutes. When Victoria emerged, her face was tear-stained but calm. She walked straight to Christopher and climbed into his lap. Judge Hernandez returned to the bench 15 minutes later. Her expression was grave. "I've heard enough," she said. "This court finds clear and convincing evidence of child abuse, neglect, and emotional maltreatment by Patricia Bennett. All custody and visitation claims are denied. Mrs. Bennett is prohibited from any contact with the child, direct or indirect, for a period of no less than 15 years. At which point the now adult Victoria Bennett may choose whether to allow contact." Patricia stood abruptly, her composed mask shattering. "You can't do this. She's my granddaughter." "Mrs. Bennett, sit down or be removed," Judge Hernandez said sharply. "Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the district attorney for potential criminal charges. What you did to that child goes beyond family disagreement. It was systematic abuse." Theodore tried to protest, but the judge cut him off. "I've made my ruling. This matter is closed." Christopher held Victoria as relief washed over him in waves. It was over. Finally, after 2 years of hell, it was over. The district attorney moved swiftly. Within months, Patricia was tried, convicted on multiple counts of child abuse and endangerment, and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Christopher felt no satisfaction in her downfall, only profound sadness for what could have been if Patricia had chosen love instead of cruelty. But mostly, he felt gratitude, because Victoria was finally, truly safe. 3 years passed, 3 years of healing, growth, and transformation. Victoria was now 8 years old, and the frightened, starving 4-year-old Christopher had rescued seemed like a distant memory. She'd grown taller, healthier, more confident. Her blonde hair shone with care. Her blue eyes sparkled with curiosity instead of fear, and her laughter, once a rare treasure, now filled their home daily. Christopher had restructured his entire life around her. Bennett Global Technologies had adapted to having a CEO who prioritized family over endless growth. The company thrived under his more balanced leadership, proving that success and presence weren't mutually exclusive. Victoria's piano playing had reached extraordinary levels. Professor Liu had connected her with the finest instructors in the world, and at 8 years old she was performing pieces that challenged adult professionals. Her gift wasn't just technical, she played with emotional depth that moved audiences to tears, but more importantly, Victoria was happy. She attended the Hawthorne Academy, where she'd found friends who understood what it meant to be different. She laughed, played, asked endless questions, and expressed opinions without fear. The nightmares had faded to occasional bad dreams. Therapy had given her tools to process her trauma. And most crucially, she'd learned that love didn't have to be earned. It simply was. One spring evening when Victoria was 8, Christopher found her in the music room, working on a new composition. He listened from the doorway as her fingers danced across the keys, creating something beautiful and entirely her own. When she finished, she turned to him with a bright smile. "Do you like it, Daddy? I call it our song. It's about you and me finding each other." "It's perfect," Christopher said, his throat tight with emotion. "Just like you." Victoria giggled and ran to him for a hug. As Christopher held his daughter, he thought about how close he'd come to losing her, how his grief and Patricia's manipulation had nearly destroyed the most precious thing in his life. That summer, Victoria asked if they could start a foundation to help other abused children. "We could call it Finding Light," she suggested. "Like my song. We could help kids who are scared and alone just like I was." Christopher smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "I think that's the best idea I've ever heard." Together they built something remarkable, a foundation that provided therapy, legal advocacy, and support for children escaping abuse. Victoria became its youngest spokesperson, sharing her story with courage that inspired thousands. The years continued to pass. At 10, Victoria performed her first full recital to a sold-out audience. At 12, she composed a piece that was performed by the New York Philharmonic. At 14, she published a book about her experiences, with all proceeds going to Finding Light. Christopher watched his daughter grow into a remarkable young woman, brilliant, compassionate, confident, and kind. She'd taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and transformed it into purpose. When Victoria turned 15, she made a decision. She wanted to attend Juilliard's pre-college program. It meant intense training, rigorous schedules, and immense pressure. Christopher worried it was too much, but Victoria was certain. "Music saved me, Daddy," she explained. "When everything was dark, the sounds in my head were the only light I had. Now I want to master this gift, not because I have to prove anything, but because I want to. Is that okay?" "As long as you're doing it for yourself, not for anyone else," Christopher said. "I am, I promise." She thrived at Juilliard. The pressure that might have broken other teenagers only made Victoria more focused. She'd survived real darkness. Academic challenges felt manageable in comparison. On a cold December evening, exactly 13 years after Christopher had discovered his daughter washing Patricia's feet, he sat in Carnegie Hall waiting for Victoria's debut performance. She was 17 now, poised and confident, preparing to play for thousands. Backstage before the performance, Victoria found her father. She looked stunning in a midnight blue gown that matched her eyes, her blonde hair swept into an elegant style. "Are you nervous?" Christopher asked. "A little," Victoria admitted, "but mostly excited. Do you know what I keep thinking about?" "What's that, sweetheart?" "That little girl who thought she was worthless, who believed she didn't deserve to exist. I wish I could go back and tell her that everything would be okay, that she'd find light, that she'd be loved." Christopher's eyes filled with tears. "She knows, baby. She knows because you lived it. You became everything she hoped for." Victoria hugged him tightly. "Thank you for never giving up on me, Daddy, for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for teaching me what really matters," Christopher replied. The performance was transcendent. Victoria played with technical brilliance and emotional depth that left the audience breathless. She performed 3 pieces, a Bach prelude, a Chopin nocturne, and finally, her own composition, Finding Light. The final piece told her story through music. It began in darkness, haunting, discordant notes representing fear and pain. Then, slowly, light began to emerge. A single melody, fragile at first, growing stronger. By the end, the music soared with hope and triumph, a celebration of survival and transformation. When the final notes faded, silence filled the hall. Then the audience erupted in thunderous applause, a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. After the performance, reporters swarmed. Victoria handled their questions with grace, speaking about her foundation, her mission to help abused children, and her belief that everyone deserves a chance to find their light. A reporter asked, "Victoria, what would you say to other children going through what you experienced?" Victoria thought carefully. "I'd tell them that what's happening to them isn't their fault, that they're not broken, that being different is beautiful, and most importantly, that light exists, even when you can't see it. Sometimes it comes in unexpected ways. A teacher who notices, a neighbor who cares, a parent who finally sees. Hold on until your light arrives. It's coming." Later that night, back home, Christopher and Victoria sat together in comfortable silence. Victoria was exhausted but happy, still wearing her concert gown. "You know what the best part of tonight was?" Victoria asked. "What?" "Looking out at the audience and seeing all those people there because they wanted to hear me play. Not because I'd earned it through suffering, not because I'd been perfect, just because they appreciated my music. That's what freedom feels like." Christopher pulled her close. "You've come so far, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." "We've come far," Victoria corrected. "We did this together." And she was right. Their journey had been about both of them. A father learning to be present, a daughter learning to be free. Together they'd taken unimaginable pain and created something beautiful. Patricia had been released from prison 2 years earlier. She'd sent one letter requesting contact with Victoria. Victoria, now old enough to make her own choice, had declined. Not out of hatred, but out of self-preservation. "I forgive her," Victoria had told Dr. Walsh. "But forgiveness doesn't mean letting her back into my life. She made her choices. I'm making mine. And I choose peace." It was a wisdom far beyond her years, born from experiences no child should have endured. As the years continued, Victoria's star rose. She became one of the most celebrated young pianists of her generation. But more than that, Finding Light grew into a national organization that helped thousands of children escape abuse. Victoria used her platform not for fame, but for purpose. Every interview highlighted child welfare. Every concert included information about the foundation. She'd taken her pain and transformed it into hope for others. On Victoria's 20th birthday, Christopher gave her a special gift, the letter he'd written when she was 5, documenting everything that had happened. He'd saved it for this moment. Victoria read it with tears streaming down her face. When she finished, she looked at her father with profound gratitude. "Thank you for this," she said, "for making sure I'd never doubt my memories, for validating my truth." "You never have to doubt yourself," Christopher said. "What happened was real, and what you've become in spite of it is miraculous." "Because of you," Victoria insisted. "You saved me, Daddy." "We saved each other," Christopher replied. "You gave me a reason to be better, to be present, to understand what actually matters in life." Their story could have ended in tragedy. It could have been a tale of a child lost to abuse, a father consumed by ambition, a family destroyed by cruelty. Instead, it became something else entirely, a story of redemption, resilience, and the transformative power of unconditional love. A story that proved that no matter how dark the night, dawn always comes for those who keep fighting toward the light. Years later, when Victoria was 25 and preparing for her first world tour, a journalist asked her to reflect on her journey. "The abuse I suffered shaped me," Victoria said thoughtfully, "but it didn't define me. I'm defined by what I chose to do with that pain, by the children I've helped, by the music I've created, by the relationship I've built with my father. Patricia tried to break me, but she failed. I'm not broken. I'm not invisible. I'm not worthless. I'm Victoria Bennett, and I found my light, and I spend every day helping others find theirs." Christopher watched the interview from backstage, tears of pride streaming down his face. His daughter, once a terrified, starving child who believed she didn't deserve to exist, had become a beacon of hope for thousands. She'd not only survived, she'd thrived, she'd transformed, she'd triumphed. And together they'd proven that love, real love, unconditional love, has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Their light would shine forever, illuminating the path for others still searching for their way out of darkness. The end was really a beginning. Because every person Victoria helped, every child who found courage through her story, every family that sought help because of her advocacy, they were all part of the light she'd found, and that light would never go out.